SCP-682 was once at the mercy of the liminal abyss known as the Backrooms, but now the hard-to-destroy reptile had become a master of the Backrooms. After absorbing the essence of the Skeleton Queen, along with several other powerful Backrooms entities, SCP-682 had become powerful enough to create its own level of the Backrooms, Level 682. If you cannot beat the Backrooms, become the Backrooms. In its latest adapted form, 682 was able to command the lesser entities of the Backrooms, such as clumps, death moths, and hounds. These entities were now at the beck and call of 682, and could be deployed at moment's notice to savage trespassers on 682's level. While it was nearly unfathomable to believe that any human explorer could survive the long journey from level 0 to level 682, challengers would soon arrive to attempt to snatch the proverbial crown from 682's reptilian head. The death of the Skeleton Queen had upset the balance of the Backrooms, and now there were countless other supernatural beings that wanted a taste of the scrappy newcomer. The first two warriors to arrive were the infamous spear-using humanoids Entity 74 Argos and Entity 720 Tiny. Other than a shared weapon of choice and a mutual hatred for SCP-682, these two entities had little in common, but the sting of their previous defeats at the claws of their hated rival had compelled the two to make their way to level 682 and face the lizard once more. Argos bellowed as he entered into the devastated wasteland of level 682. He had appeared first, accompanied by a specially trained retinue of human soldiers in tactical gear, the Eyes of Argos. Each one wielded a lesser replica of their immortal leader's signature spear, and all were ready for battle. Faced with these intruders, all SCP-682 could do was laugh wickedly. Its own army of hostile entities stood at attention, leering at the humans. Entity 74, Argos. SCP-682 greeted its visitor. Even without eyes in that swollen head of yours, you must see that you cannot win this. Argos roared that 682 was a sinner, and his judgment was here. Argos pointed his spear, and the Eyes of Argos charged toward 682, who in turn raised a claw and signaled its own forces to meet the Eyes on the field of combat. Level 682 of the Backrooms was now a battlefield. Human soldiers and entities were clashing in pinched warfare. Argos broke through the front lines and turned his spear on 682. The reptile merely grinned through all of its teeth, as Argos' spear was deflected effortlessly off its hide. Argos struck again and again, but it seemed that the eyeless giant had totally underestimated 682's new form. This was not going to be the same fight as the previous time the two had met, with the level of strength that the reptile had amassed. It might not even be anything that could be considered a fight, at least not if it remained a one-on-one battle. Fortunately for Argos, the other of the Backrooms spear duo was about to make a splash, literally. A gateway to level 7, the Endless Ocean, opened above the battlefield, causing an untold quantity of water to flow into the war zone of level 682. It was chaos as both Argos and 682's minions were swept up in the current and drowned out. Argos was frustrated at the sudden loss of his army, but 682 couldn't care less about what happened to Backrooms entities that had temporarily bought themselves a bit more time in existence by pledging loyalty to their reptile master. It was, after all, only a matter of time before 682 had gotten sick of them and destroyed the miserable entities on a whim. Serious contenders only. Your entrance was sinful. Argos spat towards Tiny as the rushing water submerged him. My entrance, like everything I do, was perfect, Tiny scoffed. Now are you going to aid in my revenge against this loathsome beast, or are you going to be sanctimonious as usual? The spear duo acknowledged each other, and putting aside their differences in a temporary alliance, dove for 682 in an attempt to overwhelm the hard-to-destroy reptile. The tips of both spears collided with 682 and managed to push the creature a short distance across the now submerged landscape of its level. In retaliation, 682 traded its claws for a number of flexible tentacles that were able to push off the ground and propel the level master towards its two adversaries. It grappled Argos with its long, flexible arms and swung him against the solid surface of the ground. The eyeless warrior countered by stabbing one of 682's tentacles, but the clever reptile shed the tentacle immediately and jettisoned towards Tiny. The humanoid attempted to stab 682, but was unable to hit his target as his opponent used its tentacles to grab Tiny's body and maneuver around him effortlessly. Meanwhile, Argos was just now coming to grips with a disadvantage of its own. While on land, the Sin Hunter was quite capable of sustaining countless injuries and regenerating from the damage, its respiratory system had no way to evacuate the water that had begun to fill the humanoid's lungs. Though he was immortal, Argos was drowning. Even his unlimited stamina could not prevent his body from slowing down. At this moment, both entities were unable to gain a significant advantage over 682. Moreover, the lack of cohesion between their tactics was leaving both open to a counterattack. This was precisely the kind of opportunity that 682 had been waiting for. While in its prior state, the hard-to-destroy reptile was only able to adapt its own physique, but now that it had become one with a portion of the Backrooms, it had gained the ability to adapt its level as well. In an instant, 682 asserted its control over its domain and expunged the water from level 7 back into the liminal nothingness between levels. While Argos could now stand back on solid ground, it was sluggish and immobilized by the water in its body. He attempted to gag and force the water out, but leaving that kind of opening was a time that Entity 74 didn't have. Entity 720 came crashing down upon Argos, smothering the entity. Having now immobilized both of its adversaries, 682 was quite proud of itself. It whipped at Tiny with its fearsome tentacles, adding insult to injury with deep wounds across the giant's entire form.
Spear carriers don't belong on the main stage.
Drawing from the same wellspring of power that allowed it to absorb the Skeleton Queen, SCP-682 devoured the essence of both Entity 74 and Entity 720. Just like the time before, the hard-to-destroy reptile went one step further than mere consumption. The reptilian master of dimensions assimilated and incorporated elements of level 7 and level 10 into the exponentially growing borders of level 682. Now that it was victorious against the two spear-wielding humanoids, 682 let out a mighty roar that echoed throughout all the remaining levels of the Backrooms. The message to all dimensional rulers on every level was crystal clear. If they didn't come to level 682 to challenge its master, the reptile would bring the challenge to each and every one of them.
I am the Backrooms, and when my kingdom comes, I will be all there is.
While most of the entities and humans on the other levels cowered in fear, there were still several who still wished to stand and fight. The next opponent that would confront SCP-682 in an attempt to slay the creature was none other than the Blue Knight of level 28. The brightly shining suit of armor strode into level 682, carrying a raging storm behind it. Hurricane-force winds beat down on 682, followed by an unforgiving rain of lightning bolts. The reptile weathered the storm and struck back, with a vicious bite that crushed the armor of the Blue Knight's arm and part of his chestplate. Then 682 turned like a crocodile in a death roll, inflicting even more damage to the sentient armor. With his free gauntlet, the Blue Knight pounded on 682's head, bringing down even more lightning and wind on the reptile.
Your storm is weak. I feel disgusting having to use my immense power to dispel it.
Yet again, 682 manipulated its level of the Backrooms, causing the storm that the Blue Knight had called to be banished into the void between levels. The Blue Knight was aghast. The reason he had always stayed on level 28 was to spare the humans of more settled levels from the wrathful storm clouds that he was known to create in his moments of emotional outbursts. It was his most shameful curse, and yet 682 had made it disappear as simply as morning mist. The now powerless Blue Knight could do nothing as he too was devoured by 682. His next words were a plea for a wish that could never come true.
I wish I could have seen you one more time, Sarah.
Like Argos and Tiny before him, the Blue Knight and his corresponding level 28 had become part of 682 now. 682 was starting to get accustomed to the feeling of devouring levels of the Backrooms. The taste was invigorating, and out of a sense of malicious initiative, the reptilian entity went on an unplanned rampage through the surrounding levels. While it was nothing more than a trivial test of the incredible power at its disposal, 682 was able to drink in more of the Backroom's essence, and soon it was beginning to reshape the liminal abyss itself. Countless entities were nothing more than cannon fodder to the unstoppable machine of destruction that 682 had become. As foe after foe fell prey to Entity 682, master of the Backrooms, more of the other levels began to disappear as they were absorbed into level 682. The reptile was on a violent spree at this point, and could almost imagine itself back at the Foundation, painting the walls with mobile task force agents and researchers alike. In its frenzy, SCP-682 found itself once again face to face with the plush dino of level 18, the despised Entity 198 who served as a guide for lost and distressed souls, and had once regarded SCP-682 as the most tormented being in existence. Even now, the plush dino's instinct to reach out to those suffering from terrible anguish had guided it to the new and improved 682. 682 had always disliked 198, and was especially resentful that it had chosen to appear now. Did its presence mean that deep inside, 682 was still suffering from the scars of its past?
No, I have overcome that. Adapted. I always do.
682 stepped forward as if to consume its next victim, but a nagging feeling stopped it from committing to the attack. If it were to devour the plush dino, there was a possibility that it would also consume level 18, a subjective realm that would always transform to recreate the childhood traumas of the explorer inside it. 682 had not been afraid to face its traumatic past during its journey through the earliest layers of the Backrooms, but to make the echo of those painful memories a permanent part of its form seemed to be a bridge too far. Besides,
what would Jerry think of me?
SCP-682 caught itself thinking of Entity 7 again. It was frozen with indecision, unsure whether or not to devour Entity 198 on the spot. Then, a sudden blaze of scorching flames snapped 682 back to the present moment. This gasp of inferno caused the plush dino to turn tail and move to a different level of the Backrooms. 682 was now surrounded by fire at some distant level that it had never seen before. On the horizon stood a vast army of flaming beings, glowing with a solar light that gave off an unbelievable amount of heat. Presiding above all others in this militant fire army was the apparent leader, a six-armed bright red humanoid whose regal features were as imposing as the halos of sunflare that adorned his fingertips. This unfathomable being would soon be 682's latest and, thus far, greatest challenger. He was a legend of the Backrooms, and the true ruler of the warlike dimension of level 966, the Inferno, an ancient god whose relentless forest fires had chased Lord Wormwood and his tree people to the brink of extinction. The Forge Master, who pulled the flame o' the golden from the all-brilliance and made it his source of power. This was Rajaharan, the Golden Kindle, Prince of Fires of Light.
O great beast of level 682, I, Rajaran, have heard the tales of your glorious conquest throughout the liminal spaces of these Backrooms. I have heard that you hail from the front rooms and are the uncontested strongest being from that reality. I am here to answer your summons, and per your request for a challenge, see which of us is the greater.
The Prince of Fires moved his hands and cast forth a merciless conflagration of stellar flame. 682 was bathed in the fury of 1,000 suns and felt an unthinkable rush of pain, unlike even the sword of the Guardian from back home. The fires continued to lick its form as 682 went berserk and charged towards the armies of Rajaharan. Quick as the spark of an ignited flame, Rajaharan intercepted 682 and delivered a punishing kick to the lizard's spine. Fire swirled around the prince's limbs, transforming into burning weapons.
"Do not think your quarrel is with my army," the prince said flatly. "They are here to watch."
Rajaharan swung all 6 of his muscular limbs, striking away at 682 with the divine weapons held in each. 682 cried out in agony, swinging a claw back at the prince and leaving a cut across the regal being's face. The reptile then stole a page from its fallen adversaries and transformed its tail into an unbreakable spear, striking Rajaharan with a swift attack.
"Magnificent!"
Rajaharan smiled. The battle raged on for several hours, with both entities taking severe damage and continuing to fight, even as their bodies were wounded with the sheer force of all the attacks given and received. As it dragged on, Rajaharan revealed even greater reserves of solaric power than 682 could have believed. Likewise, 682's strength continued to rise as the reptile acclimated to its ungodly strong opponent. Several times, 682's body was burned entirely to atomic ash, but it was able to regenerate and continue the struggle against the Prince of Fire and Light. It was much later when Rajaharan fell. The noble golden Kindle had a smile on his face, an eternal acknowledgement that the opponent he had faced was one truly worthy of killing him.
"Well fought, Lord of 682. I bequeath my army to you. Rule the Backrooms in my stead."
As his essence burned to cinders, the forces of level 966 bowed their heads to 682, a Backrooms legend to destroy all Backrooms legend. Now go check out SCP-018. Can the Super Ball defeat SCP-682? And was SCP-682 really that hard to kill after all? For even more,